ever get the feeling you're only seeing one side of the story? Like maybe there's a whole other perspective missing.
Oh, absolutely. It's like when you're so used to seeing a picture a certain way, then suddenly you see it from a new angle. Completely changes everything.
Right. And that's what we're diving into today, this idea of a fresh perspective. We're tackling Percival Everett's James. It takes a classic, Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and, well, flips the script.
And not just a little flip, we're talking about experiencing this whole journey through the eyes of Jim, the runaway slave, not Huck Finn. Huge difference.
Totally. It's one thing to read a retelling, but this is like stepping right into Jim's shoes. And it really makes you wonder, how many stories are out there that we haven't heard?
So many. It's important to remember, history and literature, they're often told from a single viewpoint, a dominant one, Everett's James. It pushes back against that.
He takes those same settings, same Mississippi River, even some of the same plot points, but the whole feeling is different. Because now it's Jim's experiences, his thoughts, taking center stage.
Exactly, and this is where it gets really interesting. Everett's Jim, he isn't the stereotypical runaway slave you often see.
You mean how some stories make characters like Jim seem, well, almost like caricatures, not real people with complex inner lives?
Right, but Jim, he's different. He's intelligent, resourceful. You know, he even uses code switching to navigate how white society expects him to act.
Oh, wow, I remember that from the book club guide. There's a part where he tells his daughter, "White folks expect us to sound a certain way, and it can only help if we don't disappoint them." It's heartbreaking, honestly, to think about how many people, then and even now, have felt that same pressure.
Exactly. It gets to the heart of power dynamics and makes you think about the mental toll, the emotional labor involved in constantly navigating a world that's not designed for you to succeed.
It's like you're forced to play a role just to survive. And it makes you realize how powerful language can be, both as a tool of oppression and as a way to hold on to your own identity.
Exactly. Language as resistance. It's a thread we see throughout James.
And it's through the people Jim meets that we really start to see those power dynamics play out. Each encounter kind of throws a new challenge his way.
Right. They're like these little windows into the bigger picture of what it meant to navigate that time and that place, like when Jim meets young George. Remember that part? It's in our source material.
Oh, right, another enslaved man they run into on their journey.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives Jim a, wait, was it a pencil?
Yeah, a simple pencil. Might not seem like much, but it becomes this incredibly powerful symbol.
Because for young George to even have that pencil, well, that was risky, right?
Huge risk. I mean, think about it. Literacy for enslaved people, it was seen as dangerous, subversive. It threatened the whole power structure.
And of course, young George ends up getting punished.
Brutally.
Just for that one act of kindness.
It's heartbreaking because, in a way, he was trying to give Jim something slavery tried to take away: agency. That ability to shape your own life, your own story, even in a small way.
Which is ultimately what Jim and Norman are trying to do, right? With their whole plan to...
To sell Jim back into slavery.
Yeah. I mean, talk about desperate measures.
It shows the impossible choices people were forced to make, the lengths they had to go to just for a shot at freedom, and even then, there were no guarantees.
It makes you appreciate the things we often take for granted, like just being able to move freely, make decisions about your own life. But even with all that, Everett doesn't shy away from showing how complicated these situations were, like Jim's whole thing with Emmett, the minstrel show owner.
Oh, Emmett. Talk about a walking contradiction.
Right, he's against slavery, even buys Jim with the supposed intention of setting him free.
And then makes him perform in blackface. It's like, come on, how much more hypocritical can you get?
It's almost funny if it weren't so awful, you know?
Exactly. And that's where Everett's skill as a writer really comes through. He's able to use satire to highlight these absurdities without ever feeling preachy or heavy-handed.
It's more like he's inviting you to think critically about these things, to see how messed up they really are.
Right. And through it all, you have Jim, trying to make sense of it all, of the injustice, the hypocrisy, while still holding on to hope, and more importantly, holding on to that love for his family.
But here's the thing about James. Just when you think you know where it's going, Everett takes a hard left turn from the original Huckleberry Finn ending.
Right. And that's what makes James so powerful. It's not just a retelling, it's a reclaiming of the narrative.
So we're venturing pretty far from Mark Twain here, which I think some listeners will find, well, surprising given how closely it's mirrored the plot up to now. But for anyone who hasn't had the chance to experience this version yet, I don't want to completely spoil the ending.
Right. Wouldn't want to give it all away.
Let's just say, in James, Jim doesn't end up back in slavery.
Instead, he takes control of his own fate.
There's a fire, A pretty daring escape, and get this, a really moving reunion with his family. And that's when we see something really interesting happen. Jim starts going by James. What do you make of that?
It's huge. That name change, it's about reclaiming his identity, taking back what was stripped away during slavery. He's not Jim anymore, he's James, a free man writing his own story.
And it really drives home this point that stayed with me from the book club guide, that quote where it says, James isn't just a story about slavery, but a story about people who happen to be slaves.
It's easy to forget that, right? To see the label slave and not the individual human being behind it.
Their hopes, their dreams, their struggles, all those things get lost when we only focus on one side of the story.
And that's why this idea of perspective is so crucial. It's about challenging those single narratives, digging deeper, asking questions, seeking out those marginalized voices.
Because those voices, those stories, they have the power to reshape our understanding of history, of literature, of the world around us. It's like we started off saying, sometimes you need that fresh perspective to really see the whole picture.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So if you're looking for a story that will challenge you, stay with you long after you've finished reading it, James is definitely worth a read. It's more than just a retelling. It's a story that will make you think, make you feel, and hopefully make you see the world a little bit differently. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. But the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Keep exploring those untold stories. Until next time.